My name is Rudzani, Ligege. I'm looking after the recovery plan within the TFR space and also chairing the Workstream 1, which is under the NLCC. So, yeah, I will be responding to some of the issues in terms of what does this mean, for the operating company. So the reality that TMB has shared is that come October, we will be entering a new phase altogether, of railway in South Africa, and I think in the region, for that matter. I think the fact that, 80% of the rail network in Africa is within South Africa, this is a very, very important topic that needs to be well understood to make sure that, there's continuity and there's also opportunities that could arise from this particular dispensation. So I always say that, there's never a dull moment in the rail operations, and I think what this does basically takes the whole logistics as we understood it and just put it on its head, right? Because if you think back, Transnet was the only rail operator in South Africa. Of course, there were others in terms of, the negotiated access, like the likes of Rovos and others. But I think in the main, Transnet Freight Rail was the only. So with this whole dispensation, what it does is that it then separates infrastructure and operations, and then it then opens the access to the network to anyone who wants to participate and compete in the network. So which simply means that we will be having competition, come October going forward. So the question that comes is, so what is the readiness? Or rather, maybe before I even go there, we need to understand the logic of why the government went this route. And I think the first part of it is, how do we create efficiency? I think if you look at the market share that we had in rail in South Africa, given the rail network that we had, was a lot to be desired, leaves a lot to be desired for that matter. So the view was that how do we increase, rail in South Africa? Over and above that, how do we also ensure that, we create competition? Because I think it's only through competition that you will then have a chance, a fighting chance to try and migrate, traffic from road to rail. So the fact that, we have a low market share, on rail, it simply means that the lion's share of the market has gone to road, and we need to find a way of how do we make, rail a preferred mode of transport. So, which is one of the key objectives. So, and over and above that, the investment in rail. I think Howard, shared a very interesting, presentation now about, private sector involvement in rail investment. That's where we also look at, that's why one of the reasons why the government, went the route that how do we create a platform where private sector is able to come in and compete, or rather invest in this rail infrastructure. Because rail infrastructure is quite an expensive exercise. Rail is not cheap. The barriers of entry are quite high, but it's only through those kind of partnerships that it makes this thing viable. So the question that comes is, so what does this mean, for Transnet Freight Rail operating company? We, of course, will remain the owner of the assets that we have, right? So we do have the assets, and the good thing is that, there is surplus assets that we have. And I think it goes back to the previous presentation about, how do we create leasing companies as well? So there are those kind of opportunities that comes up to say what the access that we have, how do we make it available? Because one thing about rail makes sense when you densify the network. When you start talking about reducing the unit cost, that's when rail makes sense. But if you do not have, or you do not have dense in the network, the cost goes up quite significantly. But it's only through running a lot of trains and a lot of volumes that it reduces the price. So our aim is that how do we make sure that we densify the line through all of these other partnerships that we have. So in terms of that, we are ready. We've got the resources. We've got the people, because these trains need to be driven by people. We've got the people. Of course, we've got also the legal framework as well in terms of how do we deal with what is required within the South African borders, i.e. the RSR requirements. So there needs to be those requirements, the permits that you need to have. We do have those. Of course, the issues of the commercial agreements. One thing that will change is with the arrangements that we have with the neighboring countries is that we'll need to relook at some of the commercial agreements that we have, because now what it means is that I will be paying a certain fee to access to TEMBI to access the network, and of course there need to be some arrangement in terms of how we deal with that. Slot applications, we will be ready. I think come October we'll be starting the process of applying for slots, and then the issues of systems. I think there was quite a elaborate discussion around systems. We are ready when it comes to that. And of course, with regards to labor as well, because all of these trends need to be driven by people. We are at advanced stages engaging labor and making sure that our people are game ready. Because what this does, as I said, for the longest of time, we've been a monopoly, for a lack of a better word. But now, having competition it means even the people need to start thinking differently and approaching this whole thing differently as well. So currently where we are for this current financial year, we are of course chasing 170 million tons, and our aim is eventually to get to above 220 million tons. In the South African context, that is the number that will definitely make sense in terms of job creation and. So we are in the process of dealing with that. Of the 170, 10.5 is the inter-Africa, trade that we have. And we know that there's still a lot that we can get. So we are really, pulling all stops to make sure that we capture the market that is out there that we can take advantage of. I think the other part as well that I just need to touch on is the fact that, a lot of these inter-Africa trade that is coming through is coming from, countries that are landlocked. And I think we've got an obligation, as a country that has got ports, to make sure that we support those countries. Botswana is one of them, where already, I think Solomon in the previous engagement, he was indicating what is it that we're doing to make sure that we make these kind of flows viable. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at. And then the other part that I think is key and what this reform brings is that it starts elevating the voice of the customer. Because for the first time after a long time, the customer's got a choice. It's no longer about only TFR. It means there are other players that are in, and if we don't shape up, certainly you then start losing business. That's basically the nature of the game. And that is why we then need to make sure that we are game ready to start taking advantage of these kind of things. So there's a lot that we can talk about in terms of what this means, but I think what is at the heart of it is that we're no longer going to, I think Bonkosi mentioned it quite nicely, that our customers are customers in transit. And gone are the days that we're just going to look at railways. We also need to look at the end-to-end to say how do we become a one-stop shop for the customer, and how do we make sure that we start dealing with the door-to-door kind of service, and we move away from just looking at rail. So those are the kind of nuggets that I can just share in terms of where are we going, as the Transnet Freight Rail operating company. Thank you, Chair.